The coffee pot rattled against the iron stove, black liquid spattering onto the hot surface with angry little hisses. Eli Morgan pulled the handle away from the flames, muttering under his breath as the scalding metal burned right through his work gloves. Lord have mercy. 3 weeks running. And he still couldn't brew a decent cup without either scorching it black as tar or making it weak as dishwater. A fellow ought to manage something as simple as morning coffee after 5 years of living alone. But apparently the good Lord hadn't seen fit to bless him with kitchen sense. The cabin pressed in around him, same as always walls he'd built with his own 2 hands. Every board cut and fitted just so. Should have felt like home by now. Instead, it felt more like a wooden box he'd trapped himself inside, with silence thick enough to cut with a knife. Outside his window, 14 head of cattle scattered across the autumn pasture, their red hides bright against the yellowing grass. Not enough to call himself a real cattleman yet, but more than he'd owned 2 years back. Progress came mighty slow when a man worked by himself. Eli scraped the burnt coffee grounds into a tin bucket, knowing full well he'd end up drinking the bitter mess anyway. No sense wasting good grounds, even ruined ones. The ride into Hartwell's general store took him the better part of 2 hours, long enough for his nerve to fail and rally 3 times over. By the time he tied his bay horse to the hitching rail, his hands were steady again, but his stomach felt full of June bugs. The store carried that familiar mix of smells, leather and pickle brine, coffee beans and woolen goods. Mrs. Hartwell glanced up from her account book, spectacles sliding down her nose like they always did. "Morning. Eli. Come for supplies." "Yes, ma'am." He cleared his throat, hat in his hands. "Also wondering if you might know somebody looking for work." Her gray eyebrows climbed toward her hairline. "What sort of work you talking about?" Heat crept up his neck like spilled coffee. "Housework, cooking and such." Mrs. Hartwell set down her pencil, studying him like he'd sprouted a second head. Eli Morgan, asking for domestic help. The same bachelor who'd politely turned down more than one widow lady's offer to help him get properly settled. "There's a young woman staying over at the boarding house," she said finally. "Came in on Tuesday's stage. Quiet sort. Pays her way. But I suspect her funds are running low." Through the front window, Eli could see a figure in blue cotton sitting on the boarding house porch, even from this distance. Something about the way she held herself straight-backed, but ready to move quick, spoke of somebody who'd learned to be careful. "What's her situation?" Mrs. Hartwell lowered her voice the way women did when sharing important business. "Rose Ellen Hayes. That's all she's given for a name. Polite as Sunday morning, but there's something in her eyes that makes me think she's seen trouble." She paused, choosing her words. The kind of trouble that follows a woman when she's got nowhere else to turn. Eli bought his usual supplies: flour, salt pork, coffee beans, and a tin of peaches he didn't really need. Mrs. Hartwell wrapped everything in brown paper, tying the bundle with hemp string that smelled of distant fields. "You want me to speak with her? Reckon I'll handle it myself." The boarding house porch creaked under his boots. Up close, he could see Rose Ellen Hayes was maybe 24, 25, with dark hair pulled back in a style that spoke of practicality over fashion. Her dress showed good quality but careful mending, and her hands rested in her lap like she was trying to take up as little space as possible in the world. "Miss Hayes." She looked up, and he saw what Mrs. Hartwell had meant about her eyes. They held the sort of watchfulness that came from learning to read danger in small signs. "Yes, sir. Name's Eli Morgan. I've got a spread 15 miles northeast of here, looking for someone to help with housework." She didn't answer right away, studying his face with the thoroughness of somebody who'd learned to be particular about the men she trusted. "What manner of work, exactly?" "Cooking, mostly. Keeping the place tidy. I can offer room and board, plus $2 monthly." "You married, Mr. Morgan?" "No, ma'am." "Then where would I sleep?" "Built a second room a while back. Good door with a proper lock. Something eased in her shoulders at that. You cook for yourself now. After a fashion, though I burnt the coffee again this morning. The corner of her mouth might have twitched. Could have been the start of a smile. I reckon I can do better than that. Most folks could. She sat quiet for a long moment, weighing choices he couldn't see. When she spoke, her voice carried the flat practicality of someone who'd learned to make hard decisions without the luxury of better options. When would you want me to start? Today, if you're willing. I'll settle your account here. That's generous of you. It's practical. I need the help, and you need the work. Rose Ellen Hayes stood, smoothing her cotton skirts. She was taller than he'd expected, maybe 5.5 feet, with the kind of quiet composure that suggested strength held in reserve. I'll fetch my things. Her belongings fit in a single carpet bag made of worn leather with brass corners polished until they gleamed. She carried it herself, declining his offer of help, and climbed onto the wagon seat with the easy movement of someone used to taking care of herself. The 15-mile ride passed mostly in comfortable silence. Eli found himself stealing glances at his passenger, trying to read the expression on her face as she took in the rolling landscape. When they crested the small rise that brought his homestead into view, she sat forward slightly, taking inventory of the cabin, barn, and scattered outbuildings. Good water, she asked. Spring-fed well, never runs dry. Garden space. South side gets full sun most of the day. She nodded, still studying his small domain with the attention of someone calculating possibilities. When they pulled up beside the cabin door, she climbed down before he could offer assistance, standing with her carpet bag in hand. The cabin looked smaller somehow, seen through her eyes. 2 rooms, stone chimney, windows with real glass instead of oiled paper. Not grand, but solid. Built to last through Montana winters. I'll show you around, he said, suddenly aware of his bachelor housekeeping. The main room held his handmade table and chairs, all crafted from local pine. The stone fireplace dominated one wall, with his few cooking implements hanging nearby. A ladder led to the loft where he stored grain and tools. The second room, her room, now contained a simple bed frame, washstand, and wooden chest for belongings. Door locks from the inside, he said, showing her the iron latch he'd installed. Rose Ellen set her carpet bag on the quilt, testing the mattress with one hand. What are your expectations? Mr. Morgan. Breakfast before dawn, supper when I come in from the fields, keep the place clean, washing when it needs doing. Beyond that, reckon we'll sort things out as we go. Town visits church on Sunday. I can take you to town Saturdays for supplies. Sunday's your own time. She was quiet again. That careful weighing he was beginning to recognize. When she looked at him directly, her eyes held a question she didn't voice. I'll leave you to get settled, he said. Supper in a couple hours. I'll have something ready. He spent those 2 hours splitting wood behind the cabin, working off nervous energy, while sounds of activity drifted through the open door. The scrape of a pot being cleaned, the soft thud of supplies being organized, the whisper of a broom across floorboards. When he came inside, the change hit him immediately. The table had been scrubbed spotless, his few dishes arranged properly on the shelf. The floor showed fresh sweep marks, and something that actually smelled like real cooking, not just heated beans, filled the air. Rose Ellen stood at the stove, stirring something in his largest pot. She'd rolled her sleeves back, showing slender forearms, and pinned her hair up more securely. The blue cotton dress made her look younger, but her movements spoke of sure experience. Smells fine, he said. Just stew. Found vegetables in your root cellar I didn't expect. Those carrots and onions. Bought weeks ago with good intentions, then forgotten. On the table, she'd set 2 tin plates, 2 cups, and proper napkins cut from flour sacking. The cabin felt different somehow, alive. As she ladled stew into bowls, their fingers brushed briefly when she handed him his portion. "How do you find the place? Well built, good proportions." She took her seat across from him, unfolding her napkin with careful precision. A man who takes care with his building generally takes care with other things too. They ate in the sort of quiet that felt comfortable rather than empty, punctuated by the sounds of spoons against tin and the distant lowing of cattle settling for the night. The stew was better than anything he'd managed in months real cooking, with layers of flavor that spoke of patience and skill. "This is mighty good, he said. "Thank you kindly." When they finished, she cleared the dishes without being asked, heating water for washing while he banked the fire for the night. It felt like a routine they'd been following for years instead of hours. "I'll be up before dawn," he said, "but no need for you to rise that early your first day." "I'm used to early mornings." He lingered by the fireplace, reluctant to break the peaceful atmosphere that had settled around them. Rose Ellen dried the last dish, hanging the towel precisely on its peg. "Mr. Morgan." "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the work. Thank you for taking it." She disappeared into her room, the door closing soft behind her. Eli climbed to his loft, listening to the small sounds of her preparing for sleep, the creak of floorboards, the whisper of cotton fabric, the gentle thud of shoes being set aside. For the first time in months, the cabin didn't feel empty. But outside in the darkness, something else was stirring. Hoofbeats, still distant but coming closer, moving with purpose through the Montana night. Before we continue, I'd love to know which city you're watching from. Let's get back to the story. Rose Ellen's bare feet touched the cold pine floorboards before the rooster crowed. Through her small window, the sky held that deep gray black that came just before dawn broke, and she could hear Eli moving around in the main room, the scrape of a chair leg, the rattle of the coffee pot against iron. She dressed quickly in the dim light, pinning her hair back with movements made smooth by years of early mornings. The floorboards groaned softly under her weight as she stepped into the main room, where Eli stood hunched over the stove, poking at reluctant flames with a charred stick. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Let me see to that." He stepped aside, and she took swift inventory of his kitchen supplies. Flour barrel, maybe half full, salt pork wrapped in cloth in the cold box, a basket of eggs fresher than she'd expected. This man had been choosing to eat poorly, not forced into it by lack of provisions. The burnt coffee grounds went straight into the fire, hissing and sending up bitter smoke. She started fresh, measuring new grounds into the battered pot while bacon began to sizzle in the cast-iron skillet. Eli settled at the table, watching her work with the quiet attention of somebody trying to learn. "You keep better supplies than most bachelors," she said, cracking 3 eggs into a blue ceramic bowl. "Always meaning to cook proper meals. Meaning and doing are different animals entirely." She whipped the eggs with a fork until they turned pale yellow, then poured them into the pan beside the browning bacon. The smell began to fill the cabin, honest cooking smells, not the burnt offerings Eli had been making do with. "Where'd you learn to cook?" he asked. Her hand paused just a moment over the eggs. "My mother taught me, before she passed." She served him bacon and eggs on a clean tin plate, the eggs light and golden, the bacon crisp without being charred. Eli took his first bite, and she watched his face change surprise first, then something that might have been gratitude. "This is how food's meant to taste," he said. Rose Ellen poured coffee into 2 cups, the liquid dark and strong without that bitter edge of burnt grounds. They ate in the kind of quiet that felt natural, morning light beginning to creep through the windows and paint golden rectangles across the scrubbed wooden table. When Eli rose to head out for morning chores, he stopped at the door. "I'll be back around noon," Nothing fancy needed. I'll have something ready. She watched through the window as he walked toward the barn, his movements loose and easy in the growing light. Then she turned back to the kitchen, rolling up her sleeves. The dishes needed proper washing. The pantry wanted organizing. That floor could use a thorough scrubbing with lye soap. By mid-morning, she had rearranged his supplies by cents instead of convenience flour and cornmeal together, seasonings in a neat row, the few precious spices grouped where they wouldn't get knocked over by accident. She found a forgotten tin of peaches hidden behind a sack of beans. Through the open door, she could hear the steady sound of an axe biting into wood, clean, rhythmic strikes that spoke of a man who understood his tools. She found herself timing her own work to match that rhythm, sweeping in time with his chopping. When noon arrived, she had soup simmering on the stove, real soup made from the ham bone she'd found wrapped in cheesecloth, with vegetables from his surprisingly well-stocked root cellar. Eli appeared in the doorway, right on schedule, hat in his hands, a question in his brown eyes. "Smells different in here," he said. "Different how? Like somebody actually lives here instead of just sleeping here." She ladled soup into bowls, noting how he waited for her to sit before picking up his spoon. Good manners, despite the rough living. "Tell me about your cattle," she said. "Not much to tell. 14 head now. Had 16. But wolves took 2 last winter." "Wolves still troubling you?" "Haven't seen sign lately, but they're always out there somewhere." She nodded, filing that information away. Wolves meant keeping doors latched after dark, meant being careful about hanging wash too far from the house. After Eli left for his afternoon work, Rose Ellen found herself standing at the window, watching his figure grow smaller as he walked toward the distant pasture. The cabin felt larger with him gone, but not empty the way it must have been before. His presence lingered in small things, the coffee cup left on the table, the hat hanging on its wooden peg by the door. She spent the afternoon exploring the boundaries of her new world. The root cellar held more surprises: potatoes, carrots, onions, even some preserved apples. The pantry revealed Treasure's real vanilla extract, probably imported from somewhere far away, a precious tin of white sugar. This wasn't a poor man's kitchen. As evening approached, she put together a proper supper: cornbread with a golden crust, beans slow-cooked with molasses and salt pork, greens wilted down with bacon grease. She set the table with care, folding flour sack napkins into neat triangles. Eli returned as the sun touched the western horizon, his face dusty and his shirt damp with honest sweat. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene: the carefully set table, the warm light from the kerosene lamp, the woman in blue cotton who'd somehow transformed his bachelor cabin into something that felt like home. "Wash basins on the porch," she said. "Supper's ready when you are." He nodded and stepped outside. She could hear the splash of water, the sound of him scrubbing away the day's work. When he returned, his hair was damp and his face clean, water droplets still clinging to his shirt collar. They ate by lamplight, the conversation coming easier than it had that morning. He told her about his plans for the cattle, about new pasture he was thinking of opening come spring. She asked practical questions about weather patterns, nearest neighbors, those wolves he'd mentioned. "Closest place is the Morrison spread," he said. "About 8 miles south. Good Christian folks. They know you hired help." Something flickered across his face. Not yet, but the way he said it made her think he wasn't entirely sure how that news might be received. She'd lived long enough to recognize the sort of trouble that came from small communities and their opinions about unmarried men and women sharing the same roof. As they finished eating, a sound drifted through the evening air, hoofbeats approaching fast through the darkness. Eli's head came up sharply, alert as a hunting dog. The hoofbeats grew louder, then stopped abruptly just outside. Heavy boots hit the wooden porch, followed by a sharp knock that echoed through the cabin like gunshots. Rose Ellen's hand froze halfway to her coffee cup. In the space of one heartbeat, she'd gone from peaceful to terrified. her eyes fixed on that door like it might burst into flames. The knocking came again, more insistent this time, and Rose Ellen was already rising from her chair, backing toward her room with the careful movements of someone who'd learned exactly when to run. "Eli, you in there." The voice through the door belonged to Tom Morrison, and Rose Ellen's shoulders dropped a fraction as she recognized the familiar cadence of a neighbor calling. Not strangers. Not the kind of men who rode hard through darkness and knocked like they meant to break down doors. "Coming, Tom?" Eli pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the floorboards. Rose Ellen stayed where she was, halfway between the table and her room, watching Eli's face as he lifted the latch. Tom Morrison stood on the porch, hat in his weathered hands, his lined face creased with something that looked like worry. "Evening, Eli. Sorry to bother you so late." "No bother at all. Come on in." Tom stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the lamplight. When his gaze found Rose Ellen standing by the table, his gray eyebrows rose slightly, but he was too much a gentleman to stare. "Ma'am." "Mr. Morrison." She smoothed her cotton skirts, grateful her voice came out steady. "Tom, this is Rose Ellen Hayes. She's helping me with the housework." Tom nodded, accepting the explanation without question. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Hayes." Eli gestured toward an empty chair. "Sit yourself down. You want coffee?" "That'd be welcome." Rose Ellen moved to pour a third cup, her hands steady now that the immediate danger had passed. Whatever had frightened her about unexpected visitors, Tom Morrison wasn't part of it. "What brings you out this way?" Eli asked, settling back into his chair. Tom wrapped his calloused fingers around the warm cup, using the pause to organize his thoughts. "Lost 3 head 2 nights past. Found tracks this morning, wolves, but not like any pack I've seen in 20 years of ranching." "How many you reckon?" "Hard to say for certain. Maybe 6, maybe 8. Big ones, judging by the size of those paw prints." Rose Ellen set the coffee pot back on the stove, listening to the men's talk while she cleared the supper dishes. Wolf conversation was serious business in cattle country. A pack that size could wipe out a small herd like Eli's in a single night of hunting. "You seen any sign on your land?" Tom continued. "Haven't looked lately. Been occupied with other matters." Eli's eyes flicked toward Rose Ellen, then back to his neighbor. "Might want to check your stock come morning. These wolves are smart. They hit my place right after that storm, when the wind would cover their scent." Rose Ellen carried the dirty dishes to the wash basin, half listening to the men discuss patrol schedules and rifle placement. This was the kind of practical talk that happened in every frontier household, sensible conversation about real dangers. Tom finished his coffee and stood. "I'll be riding the boundary line tomorrow. You want to join me?" "I'll be there." "Much obliged." Tom nodded to Rose Ellen. "Nice to meet you, Miss Hayes. Hope you find the territory to your liking." "Thank you, Mr. Morrison." After Tom left, Rose Ellen continued washing dishes while Eli banked the fire for the night. The routine felt natural now, like they'd been sharing these evening tasks for months instead of just days. "Wolf trouble's serious business," she said, scrubbing grease from the iron skillet. "Serious enough, but Tom's always been cautious by nature. Might be nothing more than his imagination." She dried the skillet with a flour sack towel, noting how Eli moved around the cabin checking the door latch, adjusting the lamp wick, settling things for the night. Careful habits, like a man who'd learned to pay attention to details that mattered. "Mr. Morgan." "Eli." "No need for such formality when it's just us." She hung the towel on its wooden peg, considering his words. "Eli, then, what should I know about living out here?" He looked at her directly, and she saw him weighing how much truth to tell. "It's not town living. Things can happen fast, and help's a long way off." "What sort of things?" "Weather. Wild animals. Sometimes people." The last word hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning she wasn't sure she wanted to explore. Rose Ellen folded her arms across her chest, suddenly aware of how isolated this place was, how far from any kind of protection except what Eli could provide. "That rifle above the fireplace," she said. "You know how to use it." "Well enough." "Could you teach me?" Something shifted in his expression, surprise, followed by what might have been approval. "You've handled firearms before." "My father taught me to shoot when I was 12, but that was a long time back." Eli pulled the Winchester down from its pegs, checking the action with practiced movements. "Lever action. Holds 15 rounds." He handed her the weapon, watching as she tested its weight and balance. The wooden stock felt familiar against her shoulder, muscle memory returning despite the years. "Still remember the feel of it," she said, sighting down the barrel toward the far wall. "Good. I'll show you where I keep the ammunition tomorrow." Over the next week, they settled into rhythms that felt older than their brief acquaintance. Rose Ellen rose before dawn to start coffee and breakfast. Eli worked his cattle and mended fence while she transformed his bachelor quarters into something that looked like a real home. She found muslin among his supplies and sewed curtains for the windows, washing the fabric in lye soap until it gleamed white as fresh snow. She organized his medicine shelf, grouping bottles by purpose: laudanum for pain, quinine for fever, camphor for chest complaints. She swept and scrubbed until the pine floorboards showed their natural honey color. Eli began bringing in wildflowers with the evening milk, claiming they were wilting where they stood. Prairie roses in a mason jar, black-eyed Susans in a cracked pottery pitcher. He never made ceremony of it, just set them on the table like they belonged there. Their conversations grew longer over supper. He told her about his plans for the ranch, about the irrigation ditch he wanted to dig come spring. She asked about the soil, about rainfall patterns, about markets for cattle in Helena and Butte. "You know something about ranching," he said one evening, cutting into cornbread that was golden and light as cake. "I grew up on a farm, different sort of farming, but some things are the same everywhere." "Where was that?" Rose Ellen's hand paused over her coffee cup. "Ohio. Long time ago now." She didn't elaborate, and Eli didn't press. They'd both learned to respect the boundaries around certain subjects, the places where conversation turned careful and guarded, but something was building between them, something that went beyond their practical arrangement. Rose Ellen felt it in the way Eli lingered over supper, in how he found excuses to come inside during the day needing a drink of water, looking for a particular tool, checking on some detail of the house that didn't really require checking. She felt it in her own behavior, too, in how she timed her bread baking so the cabin would smell of yeast and flour when he came in from the fields, in the way she mended his shirts with smaller, more careful stitches than strictly necessary, in how she caught herself watching through the window as he worked, noting the easy strength in his movements. One evening, after they'd finished the dishes and Eli had settled into his chair to whittle, Rose Ellen took out her sewing basket. She'd been mending a tear in one of his work shirts, and the lamplight was good for close needlework. "That shirt's seen better days," Eli observed, watching her thread a needle. "Good fabric, though worth the saving." She worked in comfortable silence for several minutes, her needle flashing in and out of the blue cotton. Eli whittled shavings from a piece of pine, working on what looked like a handle for a wooden spoon. "Rose Ellen, yes, I want you to know." He stopped, the knife pausing in his hands. "What I'm trying to say is, I'm grateful you're here." She looked up from her sewing, meeting his eyes across the space between them. The lamplight cast shadows across his face, making him look younger somehow, less certain than the capable rancher she'd come to know. "It's a fair arrangement," she said carefully. "It's more than that." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to name. Rose Ellen bent her head back to her sewing, but her hands had started to tremble slightly, making the stitches uneven. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending something loose clattering across the porch. Eli set down his whittling and went to check the door latch. his movements suddenly tense and alert. "What is it?" "Probably nothing. Just—" A sound cut through his words. Hoofbeats again, but different this time. Multiple horses, moving at a steady pace rather than the urgent gallop of a neighbor with news. Coming closer through the darkness, Rose Ellen's needle slipped, pricking her finger. A drop of bright blood welled up, dark against her pale skin. "How many riders?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Eli moved to the window, peering through a gap in the muslin curtains. 3, maybe 4. The hoofbeats stopped outside the cabin. Rose Ellen stood frozen beside her chair, the mending clutched in her hands, that same terrible fear from before flooding back into her face. This time, when the knock came, it was different. Not Tom Morrison's neighborly rap, but the measured, authoritative sound of men who expected doors to open when they knocked. Eli Morgan. The voice was unfamiliar, cultured, with the kind of confidence that came from money and position. Rose Ellen's face had gone white as those muslin curtains. "You know these men?" Eli asked quietly. She shook her head, but something in her eyes suggested she might know exactly who they were. "Mr. Morgan, I represent certain business interests. Might I have a word?" Rose Ellen dropped the mending and backed toward her room, her eyes never leaving that door. Her lips moved silently, and Eli realized she was praying, whatever these men wanted. Rose Ellen Hayes was more frightened than he'd ever seen another human being, and they hadn't even come inside yet. Eli kept his hand on the door latch, opening it only wide enough to see the man on his porch. Well-dressed stranger in a black wool coat, gold watch chain glinting in the lamplight. Behind him, 2 other men sat their horses in the yard, their faces lost in shadow. "Kind of late for business calls," Eli said. "I apologize for the hour. We've been riding hard to catch up with some stolen property." Rose Ellen's sharp intake of breath cut through the evening air like a blade. Eli glanced back at her, seeing how she'd pressed herself against the far wall, her face drained of all color. What kind of property? A woman, young, dark-haired, might be calling herself Rose or Ellen, or some variation. The stranger's voice carried the smooth confidence of a man used to getting what he wanted. "Worth considerable money to the right parties." Eli's fingers tightened on the door. "Don't know anyone by that description. Perhaps your hired girl has seen someone matching it. We'd be happy to speak with her directly." Through the crack in the door, Eli could see the stranger's eyes trying to peer into the cabin. Professional eyes, taking inventory, looking for details that didn't match the story he was being told. "My hired girl's already retired for the evening." "Of course," the man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, if you should encounter this woman, there's a substantial reward for information leading to her recovery. She belongs to a gentleman named Marcus Caldwell, who's quite anxious to have his property returned." The word property hit Eli like a physical blow. Behind him, Rose Ellen made a sound that might have been a whimper or might have been a prayer. "I'll keep that in mind," Eli said. "Excellent. Oh, and Mr. Morgan. This woman is dangerous. She's wanted for theft, among other charges. If you encounter her, don't let her pretty face fool you into doing something you might regret." The stranger touched his hat brim in mock courtesy, then turned and walked back to his horse. The 3 riders melted into the darkness as quietly as they'd come, leaving only the sound of hoofbeats fading into the distance. Eli closed the door and threw the heavy latch, then turned to find Rose Ellen collapsed into a chair, her whole body shaking like she had the ague. Rose Ellen. She looked up at him with eyes that held the kind of terror he'd seen in hunted animals. "They found me." "Who are they?" "Caldwell's men." Her voice came out as barely a whisper. "I knew they would. Eventually. I just hoped. She stopped, wrapping her arms around herself. Eli pulled another chair close to hers and sat down, keeping his voice low and steady. Tell me what happened. The story came out in pieces, like fragments of a broken mirror that cut as they fell. Her father's death 3 years ago, leaving debts that consumed everything they'd owned. The auction house in St. Louis where she'd been sold to cover what was owed. Marcus Caldwell, a wealthy man with political connections and a taste for young women who had no choice but to please him. I wasn't the first, she said, staring at her hands twisted in her lap. There were others before me, girls who disappeared when he grew tired of them. How did you get away? Fire. The house caught fire one night, kitchen accident, they said. In all the confusion, I just ran, took nothing but the clothes on my back and ran until I couldn't run anymore. Eli watched her face as she talked, seeing how each word cost her something. The careful composure she'd maintained since arriving at his ranch had cracked open, revealing the frightened woman underneath. The legal papers they carry, she continued. They say I'm his property until my father's debts are satisfied. $2,300 worth of property. $2,300. She nodded. Plus interest. Plus the cost of hunting me down. It grows larger every month I'm gone. Eli stood and began pacing the small room, his mind working through what this meant. In the eyes of the law, Rose Ellen truly was property, human property, but property all the same. The debt papers would be legal, properly notarized and filed. Caldwell would have every right to reclaim her. How long since you left St. Louis? 14 months. I worked my way west, taking whatever jobs I could find, staying in each place only long enough to earn a little money before moving on. And now they've tracked you here. Rose Ellen buried her face in her hands. I should have kept moving. I should never have stayed anywhere long enough to... She stopped, looking up at him with something that might have been regret. I should never have put you in danger. I'm not in danger. You are now. Caldwell doesn't forgive people who interfere with his business, and helping me, giving me work that's interference. Eli stopped pacing and crouched down in front of her chair, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. Those men who were just here, you think they believed my story? No, they know I'm here. They're probably watching the house right now, waiting to see what you'll do. Outside, the wind had picked up again, sending something banging against the side of the cabin. Every sound made Rose Ellen flinch. Her body coiled tight as a spring ready to snap. Rose Ellen, look at me. She raised her eyes to his, and he saw the exact moment when she made her decision. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something harder, a desperate kind of courage. I'll leave tonight, she said. Take one of your horses and be gone before dawn. That way they can't say you helped me. You're not leaving. Eli, you don't understand. You don't. These aren't men you can reason with or fight off with a rifle. Caldwell has money, influence, connections with territorial judges. He can destroy you just for talking to me. Let me worry about that. She shook her head. I won't let you sacrifice everything you've built for someone like me. Someone like you. The words came out sharper than he'd intended, and Rose Ellen flinched as if he'd struck her. But when she looked at him again, he saw something shift in her expression. Surprise. Maybe. Or the beginning of hope. You know what I am, she said quietly. What I was forced to become. I know what you are right now. You're the woman who's been taking care of my house, cooking my meals, making this place feel like a home for the first time since I built it. He reached out and took her hands in his, feeling how cold her fingers were despite the warmth of the cabin. I know you mend my clothes like they matter to you. I know you put flowers on the table because you think I might like looking at them. I know you watch the horizon when I'm late coming in, like you're worried something might have happened to me. Rose Ellen's breath caught. Eli. I know I've never been happier than I have these past weeks, and I know that has everything to do with you being here. Tears started down her cheeks, but she didn't pull her hands away. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. The wind gusted again, rattling the windows hard enough to make the glass sing in its frames. In the distance, a coyote howled a lonely, wild sound that seemed to echo the desperation building in Rose Ellen's face. They'll come back, she whispered. Tomorrow, maybe the next day. And when they do... Her words were cut off by a different sound. Not the wind this time, but something deliberate. Footsteps circling the cabin. Slow, measured steps of someone trying not to be heard. Eli moved to blow out the lamp, plunging them into darkness. Rose Ellen's hand found his in the blackness, her fingers gripping tight enough to leave marks. The footsteps stopped directly outside the kitchen window, through the thin glass. They could hear breathing, someone standing there in the darkness, listening, waiting. A scratch came at the window frame, metal against wood, like someone testing the latch. Rose Ellen's hand squeezed tighter, and Eli realized that whatever was coming, it was already here. The scratching stopped. Silence pressed against the cabin walls like something alive, broken only by the sound of Rose Ellen's shallow breathing and the hammering of Eli's heart against his ribs. Then came the soft creak of boot leather on wood, someone stepping onto the kitchen windowsill. Eli's hand found the Winchester in the darkness, his fingers closing around the familiar stock. Rose Ellen's grip on his other hand tightened until her nails bit into his skin. A gentle tap came at the glass. Not the sound of someone trying to break in, but the careful knock of someone asking permission. Morgan. The voice was barely a whisper. It's Tom Morrison. Don't light that lamp. Eli felt Rose Ellen's hand relax slightly, though she didn't let go. He moved to the window, keeping low, and eased the latch open. Cold night air rushed in as Tom Morrison slipped through the opening, landing cat quiet on the kitchen floor. Thank the Lord you didn't shoot first, Tom whispered. Got 3 men watching your front door from the tree line. They've been there since those riders left. You see them clear. Clear enough. Professional men. From the way they move, not cowpokes playing at being tough. Tom's eyes found Rose Ellen in the darkness. Miss Hayes, I expect these men came for you. Rose Ellen's voice came out steady despite her trembling. Yes, sir. Figured as much. Heard enough of their conversation with Eli to know this wasn't about stolen horses. Tom moved to the front window, peering through a gap in the curtains. They're not going anywhere tonight, setting up camp like they mean to stay. Eli joined him at the window. In the distance, he could make out the tiny orange glow of a carefully shielded campfire. What do you reckon they're planning? Nothing good. Men don't watch a house all night unless they mean business come morning. Rose Ellen spoke from the darkness behind them. They'll wait until dawn, then come for me legal-like. Present their papers. Demand I go with them peacefully. And if you refuse, they'll take me anyway. The law's on their side. Tom was quiet for a long moment, thinking it through. Miss Hayes, what exactly are you wanted for? Rose Ellen's voice grew smaller. Debt. My father died owing money. I was put up as collateral to cover what he owed. How much debt? $2,300, plus interest and collection costs. Tom whistled soft and low. That's a powerful sum of money. More than I could earn in 10 lifetimes. So you ran? I ran. Tom moved away from the window, his weathered face grim in the faint starlight. Miss Hayes, I've been ranching in this territory for 15 years. Seen all kinds of men pass through good ones, bad ones, and some that fall in between. But I've never met a man who thought he could own another human being that turned out to be worth the powder to blow him up. The law says different. The law says a lot of things. Doesn't make them right. Tom looked at Eli. You got any ideas about how to handle this? Few thoughts. None of them good. Let's hear them anyway. Eli set the Winchester against the wall, his mind working through possibilities. We could try to get Rose Ellen out the back way. Tom, if you helped her get to your place. Won't work. Tom interrupted. They'll have the back covered too. Professional men always watch all the exits. Then we fight them when they come. 3 against 1, maybe 3 against 2 if you count me. But they'll have the law on their side. And we'll be the ones breaking it. Tom shook his head. That's a losing proposition. Rose Ellen's voice cut through the darkness. There's another way. Both men turned toward her. She stood by her bedroom door, her face pale but determined in the starlight filtering through the window. I go with them willingly. Tell them I surrender. That way nobody gets hurt. Absolutely not, Eli said. It's the only way that makes sense. They get what they came for. You don't get in trouble with the law, and maybe, her voice caught slightly, maybe I can find another chance to run later. You're not going anywhere with those men. Eli, be reasonable. I can't keep running forever. And I won't let you get hurt because of my troubles. Tom had been listening to this exchange with growing thoughtfulness. Now he spoke up. Maybe there's a fourth option. Something none of us has considered yet. What's that? The debt papers those men are carrying. They're legal documents. Right signed and notarized in St. Louis. That's what they said. But they're not federal documents. They're territorial or state papers, which means they might not be valid outside Missouri jurisdiction. Rose Ellen's breath caught. What do you mean? I mean, Montana Territory has its own laws about debt collection. And I happen to know that territorial law doesn't recognize human beings as collateral for financial obligations. Eli felt something like hope stirring in his chest. You saying those papers aren't legal here? I'm saying they might not be. But we'd need to get a territorial judge to look at them official-like. And that means getting to Helena. Helena's 2 days hard riding from here. And those men aren't going to wait 2 days for us to sort out legal questions, Rose Ellen added. Tom nodded. Which is why we need to keep them busy while we figure out our next move. A sound from outside made all 3 of them freeze. Voices, low and careful, but carrying on the still night air. Should have taken her tonight while we had the chance. Boss wants it done legal. Papers served proper. Witnesses, if possible. What if she runs again? She won't get the chance. We'll be watching every door come sunrise. The voices faded as the men moved away from the cabin. Tom gestured for silence, waiting until he was certain they were gone before speaking again. We've got maybe 6 hours before dawn. Need to use that time to figure out how to get Rose Ellen to Helena alive. I'm not leaving without Eli, Rose Ellen said firmly. Didn't figure you would. But 2 people are harder to hide than 1. Eli had been thinking while they talked, an idea taking shape in his mind. Dangerous, but maybe their only chance. Tom, how many men you reckon you could round up if you rode hard? Depends what for. If it's a good cause, maybe 8 or 10. Why? Because I think it's time this territory decided whether it's going to let slave hunters operate here or not. Tom's weathered face split into a grin that was visible even in the darkness. Now you're talking sense. Rose Ellen stepped forward. What are you planning? We're going to give those men outside exactly what they want, Eli said. A legal confrontation with proper witnesses. But we're going to make sure the law they're appealing to is Montana Territory law, not Missouri law. And if you're wrong about territorial law, Eli looked at her directly, his voice steady and sure. Then we'll face whatever comes next together. Outside, one of the watching men coughed, the sound carrying clearly through the still air. Dawn was still hours away, but already the night felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for whatever morning would bring. Rose Ellen moved to the window, peering out at the distant campfire. When she turned back to face Eli and Tom, her expression had changed. No longer the hunted woman who'd been ready to surrender, but someone who'd found the courage to fight. "What do you need me to do?" Before either man could answer, a new sound reached them through the darkness. Hoofbeats again, but different this time. Multiple horses moving fast, coming from the direction of Helena. Tom moved to the window, straining to see through the darkness. That's not more bounty hunters. Too many horses, moving too organized. The hoofbeats grew louder, then stopped abruptly somewhere beyond the tree line where the bounty hunters were camped. Voices called out in the darkness, sharp, authoritative voices that carried the ring of official business. "Territorial Marshal's Office. You men by the campfire. Identify yourselves." Rose Ellen's face went white. "The law. Real law." Eli grabbed her hand. "Could be good news or bad news. How do we tell which?" Before anyone could answer, a gunshot cracked through the night air, followed immediately by shouting and the sounds of men scrambling for cover. The legal confrontation they'd been planning had just started without them. More gunshots erupted from the tree line, muzzle flashes blooming like deadly fireflies in the darkness. Rose Ellen pressed herself against the cabin wall, her fingers digging into the rough wood as the sound of men shouting orders cut through the night air. "Drop your weapons. This is federal authority. We got papers, legal papers. I said drop them weapons." Tom Morrison crept to the front window, peering through the gap in the curtains. "Can't see much, but sounds like those bounty hunters aren't giving up easy." Eli grabbed his Winchester and moved to join Tom at the window. "How many marshals, you reckon?" "Hard to tell. Maybe 4, maybe 5. Another volley of gunfire punctuated Tom's words. Professional shooting, from the sound of it. Rose Ellen's voice came from behind them, tight with strain. "What if the marshals are here for me too? What if Caldwell sent word ahead, got federal warrants issued?" "Only one way to find out," Eli said. "Eli Morgan." A voice boomed across the yard, carrying the authority of federal law. "This is Deputy Marshal Pete Henley. We need to speak with you." Eli recognized the name. Henley had a reputation as an honest lawman, one of the few federal officers who actually cared about justice instead of just politics and money. "Tom, you think it's safe to answer?" "Safer than sitting here while they sort things out with bullets." Eli moved to the door, keeping his rifle ready, but pointed down. "Marshal Henley, this is Eli Morgan." "Mr. Morgan, we have reports of fugitive slave hunters operating in your area. Are you and your household safe?" Rose Ellen's sharp intake of breath cut through the night air. Fugitive slave hunters, not legal debt collectors, but criminals operating outside the law. "We're safe for now. Marshal, good stay inside while we finish up out here." The gunfire was already tapering off, replaced by the sounds of men calling surrender and the jingle of metal restraints. Through the window, Eli could see lantern light moving through the trees as the marshals secured their prisoners. Tom whistled low. "Fugitive slave hunters. That changes everything." "How so?" "Because if that's what those men really are, then their papers aren't worth the paper they're written on. Slave hunting's been illegal in federal territories since the war ended." Rose Ellen moved closer to the window, hope beginning to dawn in her voice. "You mean they can't take me back to St. Louis?" "Not legally. They can't. Question is, how did the marshals know to come here?" Before anyone could speculate, boot steps approached the cabin door. Heavy, official steps that stopped just outside. "Mr. Morgan, this is Marshal Henley. Permission to come inside." Eli opened the door to reveal a tall, lean man in a federal marshal's coat, badge glinting in the lamplight. Behind him stood 2 deputies, their rifles held ready but not threatening. "Marshal Henley, come in." The marshal stepped inside, removing his hat as he saw Rose Ellen. "Ma'am." His eyes took in the scene, the darkened cabin, the Winchester in Eli's hands, the obvious tension in Rose Ellen's posture. "Mr. Morgan, we received a telegram from Helena yesterday evening. Reports said there were men in this area claiming federal authority to hunt down escaped slaves. They weren't after escaped slaves, Rose Ellen said quietly. They were after me, for debt. Marshal Henley's weathered face hardened. What kind of debt? Ma'am. Rose Ellen's voice grew stronger as she spoke. My father died owing money in St. Louis. I was sold to cover his debts. When I ran away, they called it theft. Who sold you? Auction house. Legal auction. With papers signed by a judge. Marshal Henley was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Ma'am, what you're describing sounds like debt peonage, which is illegal under federal law, has been since 1867. But they had papers. Doesn't matter what papers they had. No court in the United States has the authority to sell a human being to satisfy debt. Not since the 13th Amendment was passed. Rose Ellen swayed slightly, and Eli moved to steady her. You're saying I'm free, legally free. You were never legally enslaved in the first place. Ma'am, those men outside were criminals, operating under false pretenses. Tom Morrison spoke up from his position by the window. Marshal, what happens now? Now we transport these men back to Helena for trial. Federal crime, federal court. Marshal Henley looked directly at Rose Ellen. Ma'am, we'll need you to testify about what they told you, what papers they showed you. Your testimony will help put them away for a long time. What about Marcus Caldwell, the man who claimed to own me? We'll be sending word to St. Louis, having federal marshals there investigate his operations. If he's been trafficking in human beings, he'll face federal charges. Rose Ellen's knees finally gave out, and she sank into a chair. It's over. It's really over. Yes, ma'am. You're free to go wherever you please. Live however you choose. Eli set his rifle aside and moved to Rose Ellen's chair, kneeling beside her. You hear that you're free? She looked at him with tears streaming down her face. But for the first time since he'd known her, they were tears of relief instead of fear. What do I do now? Whatever you want to do. Marshal Henley cleared his throat. Mr. Morgan, if I might make a suggestion, the ladies should probably come to Helena with us. At least until the legal proceedings are complete. Make sure all the paperwork is properly filed, all the charges properly documented. Rose Ellen's hand found Eli's. Will you come with me? Try and stop me. Tom Morrison moved away from the window. Marshal, how long you figure this will take to sort out? Few days, maybe a week. Federal courts move slow, but they move sure. Good. That'll give folks time to spread the word. Montana Territory doesn't welcome slave hunters. Marshal Henley nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of word we like to see spread. Mr. Morrison. As the marshal and his deputies prepared to leave with their prisoners, Rose Ellen stood and moved to the window. Dawn was beginning to break over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Eli, yes. When all this legal business is finished, when everything's properly settled. She turned to face him, her eyes clear and bright in the morning light. Would you want me to come back here, to stay? Eli felt his heart skip a beat. Are you asking what I think you're asking? I'm asking if you'd want to build a real life together, not just a business arrangement, but something lasting, something true. Rose Ellen. I know I don't have much to offer, no dowry, no family connections, just myself and whatever I can contribute to making a home. Eli reached out and took her hands, feeling how steady they were now, how strong. You're offering me everything I never knew I wanted. Is that a yes? That's the biggest yes you'll ever hear. Outside, Marshal Henley was calling orders to his deputies, organizing the prisoners for transport to Helena. The sound of horses being saddled and supplies being packed filled the morning air. But inside the cabin, Rose Ellen and Eli stood together in the growing light, hands clasped. planning a future that had seemed impossible just hours before. Tom Morrison gathered his hat and coat. "I'll ride back to my place. Let the neighbors know everything turned out all right. Spread the word about what happened here." "Appreciate that, Tom. One more thing. Eli." Tom paused at the door. "When you two decide to make it official, you let me know. Territory needs more good families like yours is going to be." After Tom left, Rose Ellen and Eli stood alone in their cabin, watching through the window as the marshal's party prepared to depart. The sun was fully up now, burning away the last shadows of night and fear. "Ready to go to Helena?" Eli asked. "Ready for whatever comes next," Rose Ellen replied. But as they gathered their belongings for the journey, a new rider appeared on the horizon, approaching fast from the direction of town. Not a marshal or deputy, but a lone horseman, pushing his mount hard across the rough ground. As he drew closer, they could see he carried something in his hand, a yellow telegram that fluttered like a warning flag in the morning breeze. Marshal Henley saw him coming too, and his expression grew grim as he recognized the urgency in the rider's approach. Whatever news that telegram carried, it was important enough to risk a horse and rider on a dangerous dawn gallop. And from the look on Marshal Henley's face as he read the message, it was news that was going to change everything all over again. Marshal Henley took the telegram with hands that weren't quite steady, his weathered face growing pale as he read the yellow paper. Rose Ellen watched his expression change from official composure to something that looked like dread. "What is it, Marshal?" Eli asked. Henley folded the telegram carefully, tucking it into his coat pocket. "News from St. Louis about Marcus Caldwell." Rose Ellen felt her stomach drop. "He's coming here. Isn't he? To get me himself?" "No, ma'am." Henley's voice was gentle but firm. "Marcus Caldwell died 3 days ago. Heart seizure, according to the coroner." The words hit Rose Ellen like cold water. She gripped the back of a chair to keep from falling, her vision swimming. "Dead. Yes, ma'am. Which should mean the end of your troubles. But—" Henley paused, choosing his words carefully. "There's more to it than that." Eli moved to Rose Ellen's side, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. "What aren't you telling us, Marshal?" "Caldwell's death was suspicious. Happened right after federal marshals arrived at his house to investigate the debt peonage operation. Convenient timing, if you ask me." Rose Ellen's voice came out as barely a whisper. "You think someone killed him?" "I think Marcus Caldwell knew he was facing federal prison, and men like that sometimes choose their own way out rather than face justice." Henley pulled the telegram back out, reading from it. "But here's the thing that concerns me before he died. He sent word to associates in Denver and Kansas City, told them about a runaway who'd cost him considerable money and embarrassment." The cabin fell silent except for the sound of Rose Ellen's rapid breathing. Outside, she could hear the marshal's men organizing their prisoners, preparing for the ride to Helena. "What does that mean?" Eli asked. "It means Caldwell put a bounty on Miss Hayes before he died, $500 for her return to St. Louis, dead or alive." Rose Ellen's knees gave out completely. She sank to the floor beside the chair, her cotton skirts spreading around her like spilled water. The shame of it burned in her chest, even in death. Marcus Caldwell was reaching out to destroy her. $500, she whispered. "That's more money than most men see in a year. Which means every bounty hunter, outlaw, and desperate man from here to the Mississippi is going to be looking for you," Henley said grimly. Eli knelt beside Rose Ellen on the rough floor, his hands gentle as he helped her sit up. "Marshal, what can we do? First thing is to get Miss Hayes somewhere safe while we sort out the legal situation. Caldwell's death should void any claims against her, but it'll take time to get that officially documented." Rose Ellen looked up at both men, her face streaked with tears of shame and rage. "I'm never going to be free. Am I even dead? He's still trying to own me." "Ma'am, Don't you talk like that, Henley said firmly. Caldwell's dead, his operation shut down, and every man he sent after you is in federal custody. The bounty he put out is just money talking, nothing more. Just money. Rose Ellen's voice cracked. Marshal, you don't understand what $500 means to desperate men. They'll hunt me to the ends of the earth for that kind of money. Tom Morrison, who'd been listening from the doorway, spoke up. Not if they can't find you to collect. What do you mean? I mean Rose Ellen Hayes is going to disappear, completely and permanently. Eli frowned. Tom, what are you thinking? I'm thinking Miss Hayes here needs a new name, a new identity, and a community willing to protect both. Tom's weathered face was serious as stone. Territory's got plenty of ways for folks to start over if they're willing to do what needs doing. Marshal Henley was nodding slowly. Territorial courts can issue new identity documents under special circumstances. Witness protection. They call it. Rose Ellen wiped her eyes with her sleeve, leaving dark streaks on the blue cotton. You mean I could become someone else legally? More than that, Tom said. You could become Mrs. Eli Morgan, if you're still of a mind to have him. The suggestion hung in the air between them. Rose Ellen looked at Eli, searching his face for any sign of doubt or reluctance. You'd want to marry a woman with a price on her head. I'd want to marry you no matter what name you're carrying or what troubles are following you, even knowing that bounty hunters might come for us. Eli's hand found hers on the rough floorboards. Especially knowing that you think I'm going to let some dead man's money come between us and the life we want to build. Marshal Henley cleared his throat. If you folks are serious about this, we need to move fast. Get you both to Helena, get the paperwork filed, and get you married under your new identity before word of that bounty spreads too far. How long do we have? Rose Ellen asked. Maybe a week, maybe 2. Depends how fast news travels and how many men are desperate enough to try collecting. Tom Morrison moved to the window, checking the horizon for any sign of other riders. Marshal, what about those prisoners you caught? What happens when word gets out that you arrested Caldwell's men? They'll stand trial for federal crimes. But you're right to be concerned. Their arrest will confirm that Rose Ellen Hayes was here, which means the bounty hunters will know where to start looking. Rose Ellen pushed herself up from the floor, her legs unsteady but her voice growing stronger. Then we don't give them anything to find. Rose Ellen Hayes died here last night, killed trying to resist arrest. Ma'am, you said yourself the bounty is for me dead or alive. So let Rose Ellen Hayes be dead, and let whoever I become next live free. Eli stood beside her, understanding dawning in his eyes. You want to fake your own death. I want to end this once and for all. No more running. No more looking over my shoulder. No more putting good people in danger because of my troubles. Marshal Henley was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications. It could work. File a false death report. Claim you were killed resisting arrest. Bury an empty coffin if necessary. And then Rose Ellen Hayes ceases to exist, and whoever you choose to become starts a new life in Montana territory. Tom Morrison grinned. I like it. Clean break. Fresh start. And no way for bounty hunters to collect on a dead woman. Rose Ellen looked around the cabin at the home she'd begun to build with Eli, at the life she'd dared to imagine for herself. All of it balanced on the edge of a decision that would either free her completely or destroy everything she'd found. How soon can we do it? Soon as we get to Helena, Marshal Henley replied. I know a federal judge who owes me a favor or two. Outside, one of the deputies called out that the prisoners were ready for transport. The morning sun was climbing higher, burning off the last of the night's chill and painting the Montana landscape in shades of gold and amber. Rose Ellen gathered her few belongings, preparing to leave the cabin that had been her first real home in years. As she packed, her hands shook with something that wasn't fear, but anticipation, the possibility of genuine freedom, of a life built on her own choices rather than someone else's claims. But as the marshal's party prepared to ride out, a new sound reached them from the direction of the main trail. Hoofbeats again. But different from the urgent gallop of the telegram rider. These were measured, deliberate, the sound of men who had all the time in the world. Marshal Henley's hand moved to his sidearm as he counted the approaching riders. That's more horses than I like to see coming this way. Through the morning haze, they could make out at least 6 riders, possibly more, approaching in the kind of loose formation that spoke of men who knew how to work together. Bounty hunters, Eli asked. Possible. Or maybe just curious neighbors drawn by all the commotion. But as the riders drew closer, Rose Ellen caught sight of something that made her blood run cold, the glint of sunlight off metal badges, and the unmistakable silhouette of a man she'd hoped never to see again. Dear Lord, she whispered, it's him. Who? Caldwell's foreman. The one who used to... She couldn't finish the sentence. But the shame and terror in her voice told Eli everything he needed to know. The man riding at the head of the group was tall and lean, with the kind of cold authority that came from years of doing Marcus Caldwell's dirty work. And pinned to his vest was a badge that looked official enough to fool most folks who didn't look too close. Looks like news of Caldwell's death hasn't reached everybody yet, Marshal Henley said grimly. Rose Ellen was already backing toward the cabin, her newfound courage crumbling in the face of this familiar nightmare. He's come to take me back. Even with Caldwell dead, he's come for me. Over my dead body, Eli said. But the approaching riders had spread out now, surrounding the cabin and the marshal's party in a wide circle that left no room for escape. And the man with the cold eyes was smiling as he rode closer, like he'd been looking forward to this moment for a very long time. The cold-eyed man reined in his horse 20 yards from the cabin, close enough for Rose Ellen to see the cruel smile playing around his mouth. Jacob Thorne she'd hoped never to see that face again, never to hear that voice that had whispered threats in Marcus Caldwell's parlor. Morning, Marshal, Thorne called out, touching the brim of his hat in mock courtesy. Fine day for collecting fugitives. Marshal Henley stepped forward, his hand resting on his sidearm. State your business, Mr. Name's Jacob Thorne, Special Deputy commissioned by the federal court in Kansas City. He pulled a folded document from his coat. Got a warrant for the arrest of one Rose Ellen Hayes, wanted for theft of property valued at over $2,000. Rose Ellen's breath caught in her throat, even knowing the warrant was fraudulent. Seeing Thorne's confident presentation of official-looking papers made her stomach clench with familiar dread. I'm Deputy Marshal Pete Henley, and I've got federal authority in this territory. Let me see that warrant. Thorne spurred his horse closer, never taking his eyes off Rose Ellen. Certainly, Marshal, though I should mention that my authority comes directly from federal judges, not territorial officers. He handed over the document, and Henley examined it carefully. Rose Ellen could see the marshal's jaw tighten as he read, though his expression remained carefully neutral. This warrant was issued 3 days ago, Henley said finally. Same day Marcus Caldwell died. Thorne's smile widened. Mr. Caldwell's unfortunate passing doesn't void his legal claims. The debt transfers to his estate, which I now represent. Convenient timing for your commission. Legal process moves fast when there's money involved. Marshal. Tom Morrison had been watching this exchange from the cabin porch, his weathered face growing darker by the minute. Now he stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd lived in the territory long enough to know its laws. Mr. Thorne, Montana Territory doesn't recognize debt peonage claims from other jurisdictions. Haven't you heard? I've heard a lot of things. Old man, doesn't change what's written in federal law. Marshal Henley handed the warrant back to Thorne. This document appears to be in order, but I'll need to verify its authenticity with the issuing court before I can honor it. How long will that take? Few days, maybe a week. Thorne's expression hardened. Marshal, I've got 6 men here and clear federal authority. I don't think verification is necessary. The men surrounding the cabin shifted in their saddles, hands moving closer to their weapons. Rose Ellen pressed herself against the cabin wall, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Mr. Thorne," Henley said carefully, "I suggest you and your men make camp somewhere nearby while we sort out the legal questions. Rushing these matters leads to complications nobody wants." "The only complication I see is territorial officers interfering with federal business." Eli stepped out of the cabin, his Winchester held loose in his hands but ready for use. "The only federal business I see is a man trying to kidnap a free woman." Thorne's cold eyes fixed on Eli like a snake studying prey. "You must be Morgan. Heard you've been harboring fugitive property. I've been employing a free woman as domestic help. Nothing illegal in that. Depends on whether she told you the truth about her legal status." Thorne pulled another document from his coat. "This here's an affidavit from Marcus Caldwell, sworn before his death, stating that Rose Ellen Hayes stole over $2,300 in property when she fled his custody." Rose Ellen's knees nearly buckled. Even dead, Caldwell was still finding ways to hurt her. The affidavit would carry weight in any court, regardless of what she claimed about the circumstances of her escape. "That's a lie," she whispered, but even she could hear how weak it sounded. "Is it? Then why did you run? Why did you use false names? Why have you been hiding for over a year if you're innocent?" The questions hit her like physical blows. Everything she'd done to survive the false names, the constant moving, the lies about her past, now looked like evidence of guilt. Her mouth opened and closed without sound, shame burning in her chest like swallowed fire. Marshal Henley stepped between Thorne and Rose Ellen. "The lady doesn't have to answer your questions without legal representation. She'll answer them in federal court soon enough." Tom Morrison moved to Rose Ellen's other side, his presence solid and reassuring. "Miss Hayes, don't you listen to this snake. We all know what kind of man Marcus Caldwell was." Thorne's smile turned predatory. "Careful, old man. Speaking ill of the dead can be considered defamation, especially when it concerns a respected businessman like Mr. Caldwell." "Respected," Tom's voice rose. "The man was a Tom." Eli's quiet words stopped the older man before he could say something that might cause legal trouble later. "Let the marshal handle this." But Marshal Henley was looking increasingly uncomfortable as more of Thorne's men positioned themselves around the cabin. 6 armed men against 3, with Rose Ellen caught in the middle, and all of Thorne's paperwork looked official enough to fool most territorial judges. "Marshal," Thorne said, his voice taking on a reasonable tone, "I can see you're a conscientious officer, but federal law is clear on this matter. The woman is wanted for theft, and I have proper authority to transport her back to Missouri for trial. What guarantees do I have that she'll be treated properly during transport? You have my word as a sworn officer of the federal court." Rose Ellen felt bile rise in her throat. Thorne's word, the same man who'd stood by while Caldwell brutalized other women, who'd helped hunt down runaways and drag them back to face punishment that was worse than death. "I won't go with him," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I'll die first." "That can be arranged," Thorne said quietly, his hand moving to rest on his pistol grip. The threat hung in the morning air like gun smoke. Eli raised his Winchester, not quite pointing it at Thorne, but making his intentions clear. Tom Morrison's hand dropped to the knife at his belt. Marshal Henley stepped forward, his own weapon drawn now. "Mr. Thorne, I'm going to have to ask you to remove your hand from that pistol. Are you threatening a federal officer?" "Marshal, I'm maintaining order in my jurisdiction." For a long moment, the two groups faced each other across 20 yards of dusty ground. Rose Ellen could smell the sweat of nervous horses, could hear the creak of leather as the mounted men shifted in their saddles, could feel the weight of all those eyes fixed on her. Then one of Thorne's men spoke up from behind the cabin. "Boss, we got company coming." Everyone turned to look where he was pointing. In the distance, a dust cloud was rising from the main trail, multiple riders approaching fast. Too many riders, moving with too much purpose to be casual travelers. Thorne's confidence flickered for the first time. How many? Hard to tell. Maybe a dozen. Maybe more. As the riders drew closer, Rose Ellen could make out individual figures. Men on horseback. Some carrying rifles, all moving with the determined pace of people who had business to settle. Tom Morrison's weathered face split into a grin. Looks like word got around faster than we expected. What word? Thorne demanded. Word that Montana Territory doesn't welcome slave hunters. The approaching riders were close enough now to identify ranchers and townsmen from throughout the territory. Good men who'd heard about the morning's events and come to see justice done. At their head rode Sheriff Johnson from Helena, his badge glinting in the morning sun. Thorne's men were looking nervous now, their horses dancing as they realized they were about to be badly outnumbered. Marshal Henley, Sheriff Johnson called out as he approached. Got your telegram. Brought some folks who wanted to witness these proceedings. Rose Ellen felt hope beginning to stir in her chest. Whatever happened next, she wouldn't face it alone. But as the territorial men took up positions around Thorne's group, she caught sight of something that made her blood freeze in her veins. Riding at the back of Sheriff Johnson's group, trying to stay out of sight behind the other men, was a figure she recognized from her worst nightmares, Dr. Edmund Chase. Marcus Caldwell's personal physician and the man who'd helped him break the spirits of women who tried to resist. The same Dr. Chase who was supposed to be dead, killed in the fire that had allowed her to escape St. Louis over a year ago. The man who knew every detail of her captivity, every humiliation she'd endured, every secret that could destroy her new life. And he was riding with the men who'd come to help her. Rose Ellen's vision grayed at the edges as Dr. Chase dismounted with the other territorial men, his movements careful and deliberate, 20 yards away. But she could still smell the ether that had always clung to his clothes, could still see those pale hands that had held her down while Caldwell, Rose, Ellen, Eli's voice seemed to come from very far away. What is it? She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare at the nightmare figure walking among the men who'd come to save her. Dr. Chase caught her eye across the dusty ground and touched his hat brim in greeting, that same polite gesture he'd made before every session in Caldwell's basement. That man, she whispered. The one in the black coat. Eli followed her gaze. Dr. Chase. He's been practicing in Helena since spring. Good man, from what folks say. No. The word came out strangled. He's not good. He was Caldwell's doctor. He helped. She couldn't finish, her throat closing up with remembered terror. Sheriff Johnson was organizing his men into a loose perimeter around Thorne's group, but Dr. Chase had separated from the main body and was walking directly toward the cabin. Toward her. Miss Hayes, Dr. Chase called out in that same cultured voice she remembered from her darkest moments. How wonderful to see you looking so well. Marshal Henley stepped between them. Dr. Chase, this is official business. Please stay back. Of course, Marshal. Though I should mention that I have some medical knowledge that might be relevant to these proceedings. Thorne's head snapped up. You know this woman? I treated her briefly in St. Louis before her unfortunate departure. Dr. Chase's smile was warm and professional, the same expression he'd worn while preparing Marcus Caldwell's special medicines. Severe hysteria, if I recall correctly, tendency toward delusions and violent outbursts. Rose Ellen felt the ground tilting under her feet. He was doing it again, making her seem crazy, unreliable, turning her own words against her before she could even speak them. That's not true, she managed. Of course not, my dear. The hysteria makes it difficult for patients to distinguish between reality and their fevered imaginings. Dr. Chase addressed Marshal Henley now. I have detailed medical records documenting Miss Hayes' condition. Quite tragic, Really? Eli moved to Rose Ellen's side, his arm going around her waist to steady her. What kind of records? Treatment notes, behavioral observations, recommendations for continued care, all properly documented and witnessed, as required by medical practice. Thorne was grinning now, sensing opportunity. Dr. Chase, would you be willing to testify about this woman's mental condition in the interest of proper medical care? Certainly. Rose Ellen's legs gave out completely. She sank to her knees in the dust, her carefully built new life crumbling around her. Everything she'd told Eli, everything she'd claimed about Caldwell's treatment of her Dr. Chase, could make it all sound like the ravings of a diseased mind. She's having an episode now, Dr. Chase observed clinically. Quite common when hysterics are confronted with uncomfortable truths about their behavior. Stop. Eli's voice was quiet, but carried enough menace to make several men reach for their weapons. Stop talking about her like she's not here. Mr. Morgan, I understand your protective instincts, but you must realize this woman has been deceiving you about her true nature. Tom Morrison stepped forward, his weathered face flushed with anger. Doc, I've known Eli Morgan for 15 years, and I've never seen him happier than he's been these past weeks. If Miss Hayes is as disturbed as you claim, how do you explain that? Hysterics can be quite charming when it serves their purposes. They're skilled at manipulation, at presenting false versions of themselves to gain sympathy and support. Each word was a knife twist. Rose Ellen knelt in the dirt, feeling the weight of all those eyes on her, hearing the murmur of doubt beginning to spread through the crowd. Who would believe her word against a respected doctor's professional opinion? But then Sheriff Johnson's voice cut through the medical testimony. Dr. Chase, you said you have records documenting this woman's treatment. Yes, Sheriff. Detailed notes from her time under Mr. Caldwell's care. And where are these records now? Dr. Chase's confident expression flickered slightly. In my medical files, naturally. Which would be where your office in Helena... Well, no, they're still in St. Louis in the files of my former practice. Your former practice. Sheriff Johnson's tone had gone flat and official. Dr. Chase, when exactly did you leave St. Louis? The question hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Rose Ellen looked up from her position in the dust, seeing something change in the faces of the territorial men. They were no longer looking at Dr. Chase with respectful attention, but with the hard suspicion of men who'd caught wind of deception. I left St. Louis several months ago, Dr. Chase said carefully. Several months. That's interesting, because according to the telegram I received this morning, Dr. Edmund Chase died in a fire at Marcus Caldwell's house over a year ago. The silence that followed was so complete Rose Ellen could hear her own heartbeat. Dr. Chase's face had gone white as bone, his careful professional composure cracking like ice in spring. There must be some mistake. No mistake. Doc. Got it right here in black and white. Sheriff Johnson pulled a yellow telegram from his pocket. Official report from St. Louis Police. Dr. Edmund Chase, age 42, died in house fire on October 15th, 1882. Body identified by dental records. Marshal Henley's hand moved to his weapon. Then who exactly are you, Mr. The man who'd been calling himself Dr. Chase took a step backward, his eyes darting between the armed territorial men who were now regarding him with open hostility. I can explain. I'll bet you can, Tom Morrison said grimly. Question is, will it be the truth this time? Rose Ellen pushed herself up from the dust, Eli's strong hands helping her to her feet. For the first time since seeing the false doctor, she could breathe again. His name is William Slade. He worked for Caldwell, but he wasn't a doctor. He was... She paused, gathering courage. He was the one who disposed of the girls who didn't survive their treatment. A cold wind seemed to blow across the dusty yard. Several of the territorial men spat in the dirt, their faces showing what they thought of men who hurt women. Thorne's confidence was evaporating as quickly as his medical witness. Now see here, that's just more hysteria. Is it? Sheriff Johnson's voice carried the authority of territorial law. Because I'm starting to wonder what other lies we've been told here today. He gestured to two of his deputies. Take Mr. Slade into custody, fraud, impersonating a medical professional, and conspiracy charges to start with, as the deputies moved to arrest the false doctor. Thorne made his decision. We're leaving. Now. I don't think so, Marshal Henley said. I've got some questions about those federal warrants of yours. But Thorne was already spurring his horse away from the cabin, his men following in a cloud of dust and confusion. They rode hard toward the main trail, abandoning any pretense of legal authority. Sheriff Johnson watched them go with satisfaction. Let them run. We'll have proper warrants issued within the week. Rose Ellen stood in the settling dust, surrounded by the good men of Montana Territory who'd ridden out to defend her freedom. The terror and shame that had gripped her since seeing the false doctor began to ebb away, replaced by something she'd almost forgotten, the feeling of being protected instead of hunted. Miss Hayes, Sheriff Johnson said formally, on behalf of Montana Territory, I want to apologize for what you've endured. And I want to assure you that no legitimate authority will ever force you to return to Missouri against your will. Thank you, Sheriff. Now then. He turned to include Eli in the conversation. I understand you two are planning to make this arrangement permanent. Eli's arm tightened around Rose Ellen's waist. Soon as we can arrange it proper. Well, it so happens I brought Justice Morrison with me. He's waiting back in town, ready to perform the ceremony whenever you're ready. Rose Ellen looked up at Eli, seeing her own joy reflected in his eyes. Today. Tom Morrison let out a whoop that could probably be heard in the next county. About time. Territory needs more families like yours is going to be. As the crowd began to organize for the ride to Helena, Rose Ellen took one last look around the cabin that had been her first real home. Soon she'd return here not as Rose Ellen Hayes, the hunted fugitive, but as Mrs. Eli Morgan, a free woman building a life with the man she loved. The nightmare was truly over, and the dream was just beginning. But as they prepared to leave for town and their wedding, Rose Ellen noticed something that made her smile. In the kitchen window, the wildflowers Eli had picked for her yesterday morning still sat in their mason jar, bright and beautiful despite everything that had happened. Some things, she realized, were too strong to be broken by other people's hatred. Some things were built to last. Sometimes the most profound healing happens not in grand gestures, but in the quiet moments when strangers become neighbors, and neighbors become family. Rose Ellen and Eli's story reminds us that home isn't a place we find, it's a place we create together. One shared meal and one act of kindness at a time. In our modern world, we often forget the power of community that once defined frontier life. When Tom Morrison rode through the night to help his neighbors, when families gathered to protect one of their own, they weren't acting out of obligation, but out of the understanding that individual survival depended on collective care. The Montana Territory of 1883 was harsh and unforgiving, but it was also a place where people looked out for each other because they had to. Perhaps we could learn something from their example. Perhaps we could remember that the strongest walls we can build aren't made of wood and stone, but of trust and mutual support. Rose Ellen found her freedom not by running away, but by standing still long enough to let others stand with her. In a world that often feels fractured and divided, her story offers hope that connection is still possible, that community can still triumph over isolation, and that love, in all its forms, remains our most powerful force for healing. This work is inspired by classic Western literature created solely for entertainment purposes. The story does not condone, encourage, or promote any form of violence or harmful behavior. All characters and events are products of the author's imagination, and any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental.